Issues of professional competences.
I'm thankful to organizers of this PME to have possibility to take part in this conference. And I was asked to speak in English because a lot of participants are Russian. I begin. There is the main cathedral of our city. Значит, наша тема – это исследование профессиональных компетенций учителей математики. Значит,
So, now that there are many changes in primary school, teachers should meet those challenges of time. And we will consider just a few of them. In the UNESCO report of 1972, it was mentioned that there is a competence-based approach in education. So since the 1970s, schools should implement this competence approach. What is it all about? Literature tells us that competence includes knowledge, skills, value relationships in professional activities, and experience of application of knowledge in a particular situation. And this concerns not only professional experience, but also real life experience. And we should also take into account the individual features of the student. If there are certain gaps or poor knowledge, then it means that it's the weak points of teacher preparation. So we need to remember about those professional competences. We need to identify the problems of a particular teacher in his or her professional training. And it would be nice to check teachers to find out those issues. We have analyzed various projects involving the training of teachers. In the left column, you can see the names of those studies. Those are the research projects, and on the right you can see what was studied in those works. To sum up, this research was mostly dedicated to the level of the math preparation. So we are not talking about activities to identify competences. We talk about knowledge, and the main form is either questionnaires or tests, which are sometimes used. And sometimes it's the separate lessons. Is that enough to identify competences? As I already said, there are those four components in competences: knowledge of the math content, pedagogical and psychological knowledge, the skills to teach math students, and the experience of applying knowledge in a particular situation. And the best way to check those skills is the skill of resolving problems. So our main tool is to take a math problem, even complex math problems where there is no option of choosing an answer, and also some professional problems. As a result, we developed, as the Pedagogical Institute and the Philological Institute and the psychologists, they all developed a model of assessing the level of teacher competences. This model consisted of two parts, that is the diagnostic works and having a lesson. The diagnostic work consists of several parts. That's resolving math and methodological tasks. It's close to a test. That's when you have several options and you need to choose among them. There are some professional problems, methodological problems, and a video shooting of the lesson. And this slide shows how many points a teacher got for doing every part of the test and how many time he or she had. For math and methodological tasks, which were easier, you had 2 hours, but for professional problems, you were given 9 days. And also the teacher had enough time to get ready for a lesson.
Here I will give the examples from all the parts. They comply with our standard, by the way. So I'll start with part 3 and part 4 that are about professional problem tackling. Professional problem contains 2 components. First one is formulating the situation, which is quite a general thing. Here in the slide you can see an example. I'll translate it. Working with your students, you face problem for today's teenagers, low level of communication skills. It's truly so, but I haven't seen a specific instruction of how to form those skills. So you are planning a lesson in the form of a game on which elements of the environment around you can be used to develop the children's communication skills to conduct this lesson in mathematics. Except for this general situation, a list is provided, including up to 10 or up to 12 steps for a teacher to do this. As a result, a teacher has to specify the objectives and specific tasks to tackle this problem. And also 3 levels of competence were specified. The first one had to do with the familiar situation. The second one is about level is about the unfamiliar situation, and the situation of uncertainty was the third level. So the participants of our research were coming from 13 regions of Russia, over 2,000 mathematics teachers. Well, in general, there were over 5,000 of different teachers, including teachers of the Russian language. So the age, we took into account the age, and respectively were split into 3 groups, 20 to 30, etc. And the qualifications, well, the experience was taken into account. And the main objective of the research was to determine the current level of teachers' professional competences in order to suggest an adequate individualized program for further developing of a specific teacher. As a result, the following questions we raised. How does the level of mathematical training relate to methodological training, and how the level of professional competences affect tackling professional, methodological, and other problems. And if we are talking about the first part, including first 6 tasks, they were mathematical tasks. 7 to 12, they were methodological tasks in the form of a test. Even at the test level, you can see that the mathematical results were better than those of the methodological ones, except for the task number 6. Task number 6 was like that. This is an example. Probably this is explaining that you do not come across, you You don't see this in the textbooks. And so teachers are not prepared to tackle the tasks that are not part of a unified state exam. So as for the rest of the tasks, here you had to establish the correct sequence of actions when working with theoretical mathematical content, definitions, algorithms, and statements, well, theorems, for instance. So there was a sequence, incorrect sequence, and they had to form a correct sequence. Task 8 was about determining the mathematical basis for tackling the problem. For instance, you have to, if the sign, for instance, if they had a sign and the limits to an angle, they had to do the calculation. And the answers were suggested, and the right answer is marked. Task 9, they had to establish the correspondence between the geometric objects, and tasks 10 to 12 were aimed at noticing the errors. There was a situation, examples of errors made by teachers are presented, and those errors were taken from real life. So they had to, and those errors were of two kinds. So there's psychological error, for instance. A person has a certain cognitive style, dependent or more dependent or less dependent, and it's about the mentality of perception. What's the key perception channel? If the key perception channel is not the one that's needed in the task, or a mathematical error. Very often mathematical error is also connected with the experience of a child. Subjective experience of a child may be different to the so-called scientific experience. So part 2, we call it the methodological problems. There is a solution to a problem. Here, they had to study it, and there was a certain set of criteria. Teacher had to assess the solution of a problem according to these criteria. After that, they had to provide an additional problem or set of questions that will lead to solving the problem. And that's about the methodological problems. Here there is an example of a solution of such methodological problem. For instance, a sequence of questions that lead to the solution of a problem. If you take a look at the dependency between the first set of problems and the second set of problems. So we were comparing the first part. Sorry, there's a mistake here. It's not the tasks, it's the scores. And here we show with different colors the scores that the teachers got for doing the second set of tasks. And in vertical axis, we see the percentage of the teachers that coped. So better trained, so there is a correlation. Teachers who are best, who have had better training in maths and methodology did better. Also, dependency on professional category or experience. See the correspondence here. It's the same balance between the mathematical training and methodological training. So we can see the similar trends. Methodological and mathematical training dependency, of course, is the same. So we've devised the following metrics for score correlation, score and competency level correlation. So these were the results that we got. You see approximately 75% of teachers are at level 2. So the key conclusion is that this model for assessing professional competency of a teacher allows to determine the gaps or the weak points of a teacher, both in mathematical and professional experience in general, and this also allows to suggest a proper program for eliminating these gaps. Thank you very much for such a topical subject. And I want to ask a question to Arkady Aronovich about professional competencies. Tell us, please, are there any professional competencies that are a starting point in terms of training teacher in his or her subject to improve the teaching process? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Well, I'll try to reply to the question. Well, maybe I'll give a broader answer, referring to the text of the presentation we've just had. I think it's a very important research because we know very few cases of an objective assessment of teachers' competences, specifically mathematical competences, and we have to support this kind of activity. I want to draw attention to a few crucial differences between what we have as is and what we had in this research. Our university took part in a similar research that was part of teacher assessment system developing. So if we get back to the first slides, which showed the theoretical foundations for this research, we have a there we had an important notion that wasn't there on the slide. In English, it's called pedagogical content knowledge. It's been it was introduced by Professor Schulman in the middle of the 80s. He was mentioned in the slide, but this concept itself wasn't mentioned there. From our point of view, everything to do with methodological competences has to do with this key notion. And initially, this notion included knowledge of the typical errors students make, knowing the typical ideas and notions that children know, strategies for overcoming these ideas, including the wrong concepts that are there, and the ability to explain the same thing in different ways. So this is turns out to be of utmost importance. And how this work can be structured, well, despite the fact that these colleagues were using professional standard as a basis for their work to an extent, this is not, well, I can say that there is important difference here. We assess levels of a teacher based on our own understanding about these levels. Do we have to do this, or do we have to be based on what's written in a professional standard? In Russia, there is a professional standard of a teacher, and this is an example of a generic approach. It's a generic professional standard. It has nothing. It does not correspond to the specifics, and now a new standard is being developed, and it can be used for this kind of research too. And it becomes very important when you are analyzing the fragment of teacher's activity, because if you can things that depend on the way you determine the levels. You need to have something like classes, so you need a system that or grades. Well, these grades are there. Charlotte Nelson developed them, and they are used in almost all the competency assessment systems. And I would mention a big project that was funded by Gates Foundation project that's called MVT, Measurement of a Teacher's Efficiency. And it's important because there they research what assessment should be like, and well, assessment can be only a complex one. You cannot take a single tool with help of using which you can say that you did an adequate assessment of teachers' competences. It depends on the information that's being presented by a teacher, and there is such a view on the subject that says that you can only do the triangulation. You can get certain data from using one or two tools, and this gives you only it gives you only a probability that this is the competency, and then you have to support that with the rest of the data. Here, a very important tool is missing. It was missing probably because it wasn't agreed upon. The results of the students. If you are not analyzing the dynamics of students' knowledge, basically you are analyzing only the way the teacher is tackling different problems. Which means that you are missing very important data, and there is an opposite model that's based only on the students' academic results, which is it is called value-added measurement, and it's also incomplete. It prevents us from determining professional deficits. And they can work together. I think it took too much time. Well, of course, I can say something else, but I think I should finish. Thank you very much for an interesting addition. Natalia Podkhodova, can we invite you? Dear colleagues, you have an opportunity to ask your questions. Well, of course, I believe that you cannot limit yourself with a professional standard only, because in every subject there are certain special features, mathematics included. With all the respect to current state standards, a teacher is focusing on getting the good unified state standard, unified state exam results, and which is, well, okay, question time. Everything's clear or nothing's clear? Natalia, thank you for your presentation. What about the video? Were those videos recorded? Did they record the way teachers were working? Well, I took part in this research. Well, after this research, we were interested more not in the results themselves, but we were interested in different dependencies in there. And secondly, we are working in a pedagogics university, and we are training future teachers. And of course, we are concerned about assessment of their professional competencies when they graduate. And we were testing those problems with our students, pre-graduate students, and I must say that they get better results upon graduation from the university. I don't know how to explain that. Maybe whether it's us teaching them, or maybe they are forgetting what they studied in the university after they graduate. I don't know. Yes, they were recorded on video, and a big table was created. Well, we didn't present this. So that included a lot of positions like setting the objectives, motivation, actualizing, reflection, and summarizing. So all the things that have to be done by a teacher in a class.
Большое количество уроков.
I looked at a large number of those lessons by myself, and the first thing to note, it's not a very nice observation, by the way. Even though the level of math training was higher than the level of pedagogical training, but nevertheless, during lessons, teachers made fundamental math mistakes. Not at the level of 2 plus 2 is 4. That's just some lack of attention that happens everywhere, but very often teachers showed inaccurate operations, showing a lack of understanding of fundamental mathematical notions. And we saw this during the lessons. And there was another key shortcoming. As for the methodology of those lessons, there was no goal setting, and there was no stage of making a summary and analyzing. There was no estimate of the children's work during the lesson. We are talking about the assessment of their work during the lesson, and the teachers didn't do this. So it's my personal observation, and I also analyzed the results that other colleagues had. Thank you. As for the textbooks that we have for our students, what do you think about them? Well, it's difficult to answer this question because last year we published our own textbooks. So what's the difference between your textbook and all other textbooks? I believe that the special feature of our methodological school is the deep analysis of various mathematical notions. Natalia here is one of the inspirators of this approach, and we are actively promoting this approach. So in our textbooks, I'm talking about the methodology of mathematics training, our textbooks are unique because a lot of attention is paid there to the psychological basis, formulating mathematical notions while taking into account the psychological specific features of the students. We have a separate course which is called Psychological and Pedagogical Foundations of Mathematical Teaching. We published our textbook in 2005 or maybe 2007, but then we upgraded this textbook. We published another edition, taking into account the new standards. We are familiar with other textbooks, but what I said actually gave us an incentive to do this. So it's a combination of methodology, psychology, and pedagogy. Yes, and when I work with teachers from different regions of Russia, when you start talking with them about why students don't understand maths, it's often a discovery for them that actually the teacher and the students speak in different languages. They just don't understand each other because the teacher doesn't take into account the specific features of the students' understanding, different cognitive styles, which give birth to a lot of misunderstandings by the students. If we consider those differences, we can see that the child understands maths very well. The problem was not his or her lack of ability. It's not that this child is silly, a bit silly, but this child has specific features that you need to take into account. You need to explain maths in the language of the child while taking into account his subjective experience. Let me give you one example. 3 roots of 3 plus 5 roots of 7. What do children do very often? They try adding those numbers under the roots, because before that we taught them 3 fractions of 1/3 plus 5 fractions of 1/5. The structure is very similar, and we can really find a teacher who would explain those things, because the teacher doesn't say that here we have the add sign and here we have the multiplication sign. For a child it's a discovery. We just ignore that. We believe that the child should understand this, but it's not the child's fault. Let's say 3 to the degree of 5. Why should the child call 5 as the indicator, as we say 3 to the degree of 5, 3 to the magnitude of 5? So when I said to Dorofeev, teachers give lower marks for that, and he said they are idiots, and I say, well, that's the standards that require this. And I have some more experience, because I still work at school a little bit. What I see very often in the high school, 3a plus 5b, how much does it make? 3a plus 5b, 8ab. That's the answer the children give. All right? And you know why that happens? Just 3 years ago I faced a situation. Well, I'm not going to give any names, but in the textbook it was said that 3 apples plus 5 bananas is, you know how much? 8 fruits. That was written in the textbook for the elementary school. It was written there that 3 apples plus 5 bananas equals 8 fruit. And we know that the child takes everything in as a sponge in the elementary school. So I have 3a plus 5b, and that makes 8ab. And the child doesn't understand why it's not like this. This is about subjective experience. Thank you very much. I would like to come back to the presentation's theme, that is about measurement and competences. I didn't understand that slide with levels. What was the result of your research? I didn't quite understand that part. This was at the very end of the chart. You showed some level 2 chart. Well, that was the general result of those 4 components. Yes, I understand, but what do those levels mean? Level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Perhaps you remember that slide. It was at the very end of the presentation. Further on, further on. Next, next, next. Are you going towards the end? It was at the very end. There was that chart and there was level 2. It's about the competences of how many teachers and the levels of those competences. Yes, that's right. I'm asking you about those levels. What do they mean? Yes, I was talking about this slide. Well, there was a table about the points that the teachers scored. and most of the teachers had a level 2. That's how many teachers we have. And what do you mean by this level 2? What does it mean? Please speak into the mic. Every part had a certain amount of score or of points, and those points were translated into levels according to this table. It's not a question but a short comment. If there is no something that everyone accepted for your measurement. For example, in Russia we have the state standard which is used. This is a model of activity, and so the standard doesn't contradict anything. So if you do not have any general conventional understanding, then every time we can understand any level or any system of translating points into a level differently. So we don't understand what stands behind this level 2. In Novosibirsk, there is the Novosibirsk table of assessment or system of assessment, and in the far east of Russia it's another one. And in the context of such a project as the National Teachers Growth Project, we don't understand how this is going to be connected with grades, qualifications, job titles, and so on. I'm not trying to criticize what you are doing. Actually, I do support it. And you know that Mikhail Yurievich and I discuss it at many conferences. But for the future, to work out a position in our professional community, I think it would be very important to understand that there should be common methodological grounds to assess the levels of teachers. Otherwise, we have 25 different levels of assessing 25 different systems of assessing the teachers' levels. And that provides difficulties. Well, once again, we do know that it was just the first try. No one said it was ideal. Here we talked about the primary research results and the risks we identified at that stage. And the idea was that those results would be the basis for recommendations. We would try to identify the sole points for a school, for a region, for an individual teacher, and then we could provide recommendations for the personal retraining of a teacher. It's not a goal in itself to say that everything is bad or everything is good. Are there any more questions? I have a question of statistical analysis. You have a very broad selection. Well, we had some statistical characteristics in our presentations. We just put the diagrams, the charts in these slides. And then we can continue with the statistical processing of all those numbers. We didn't have a very serious selection. We had some selection, but it was only a moderate sample. We need to finish our session, and I would like to thank our colleagues for their research. That's a very long process. I would like to thank Arkady for his interesting comments, and thank you for coming here and listening to our session.